I'm the personal assistant to a mob boss, and I've always been diligent, both in public and in private. I woke up and suddenly it was 7 years later. As usual, I treated the boss with a polite distance. The next second, the man's eyes turned red. What the hell did I do wrong? I shook my head, carefully choosing my words, my tone respectful and cold. After hearing me out, his eyes were swollen from crying. You don't love me anymore? Weren't you the one who said I look pretty when I cry? Seriously, did nobody tell me the decisive, ruthless mob boss was a total crybaby? So tired. My back and legs are aching. I woke up in a familiar bed. I don't even have to think to know I just survived an intense battle. I climbed out of bed and turned my head at the sound of the door opening. It was Felix. He glanced at me, his expression flat. I'm heading to the office, he said casually. I hurried over, expertly tying his tie for him. As respectful and polite as ever, I said, okay, I'll be there as soon as I get ready. The number one rule of being a personal assistant: 1 second, sparks are flying; the next, you're in a power suit, ready to take on the world. Felix froze, giving me a very strange look. Do you think this will make me agree with you? I was completely confused. Agree to what? Did I, in a moment of passion-induced delirium, ask for something I shouldn't have? My employee survival instincts kicked in, and I immediately apologized. I'm sorry, I was talking nonsense. Felix's expression twisted even more. After a long pause, he finally muttered, then give me a kiss. Kiss who? Me? Kiss him? Although Felix and I have had this arrangement for a little over a month, we're not exactly at the kissing stage, are we? Besides, I remember Felix making it crystal clear from the beginning, sex is fine. Kissing is not. My mind was reeling, but I kept a straight face. The next second, I dutifully planted a quick peck on his lips. Felix's eyes widened in astonishment, staring at me in disbelief. I glanced at my watch and said in a businesslike tone, "Boss, it's about time. You need to get to the deal." Every week at this time, Felix would take a crew to the OT building for a transaction. I didn't know the specifics. Felix's face instantly darkened. Ava. How long are you going to keep testing me? His yelling stunned me. I was terrified he'd pull out a gun and drag me away. I immediately stood up straight and bowed a full 90 degrees, my voice distant and respectful. I'm sorry, boss. I shouldn't have pried into your business. As I was bowed over, I suddenly heard a tremor in Felix's voice. Ava, what the hell did I do wrong? I looked up, bewildered, and met Felix's misty, red-rimmed eyes. He looked like he could burst into tears at any moment. And no, that's not it, boss. That only made his eyes redder. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to calm down. Boss? You're still mad that I treated you like a plaything for 3 years, aren't you? Now it was my turn to be completely lost. Haven't I only been his personal assistant for a month? Where did 3 years come from? But I didn't have time to think about it. Because Felix was crying. Yep. That's right. The man who could make the entire city tremble was shedding tears right in front of me. My job description never included how to comfort a crying boss. Be boss, don't cry. You won't look as handsome if you cry, I stammered, unable to think of anything more helpful. That made him break down even more. You don't love me anymore? Weren't you the one who called me your pretty boy when I cried? Felix eventually left, called away by an urgent phone call. Before he went, he kissed me fiercely a few times, threatening me in a choked-up voice, "Just wait till I get back tonight." Only after he was gone did I have a moment to clear my head. I checked the date and realized it was 7 years in the future. But just yesterday, I was his unremarkable personal assistant. The 7-year gap in my memory was making me anxious. I went downstairs and saw a familiar face, Mrs. Lee, the housekeeper. I subtly questioned Mrs. Lee about what had happened over the past 7 years. After listening, I was beyond shocked. Apparently, Felix and I had been married for 3 years, and we even had a 4-year-old son. The fact that I became a mom overnight without any of the work was a lot to process. I've heard of fast-forwarding through a video, but fast-forwarding through life? So, does this mean the little assistant successfully climbed the ladder? It took me a long time to compose myself before I could ask, so, why was the boss, I mean, Felix, in such a bad mood? Mrs. Lee looked surprised. Ma'am, have you forgotten? You and Mr. Wilton had a huge fight last night. You even threatened to divorce him. Who? Me? Did I have a death wish? Threatening divorce? Seeing my silence, Mrs. Lee continued, if you ask me, ma'am, you're just too attached to the child. It's no wonder Mr. Wilton is upset. It would be good for the boy to spend some time with his grandmother, to build their bond. I scratched my head. So, I was fighting with Felix over our son. I probed further. I accidentally mentioned the deal at the OT building in front of Felix again. Mrs. Lee slapped her thigh in exasperation. Oh, ma'am, how could you? How could you bring that up again? Mr. Wilton went straight years ago and got out of that business. Don't you remember how you two fought constantly over it? My mouth fell open. No wonder Felix said he was going to the office. So he had cleaned up his act. I smiled and put my arm around Mrs. Lee affectionately. If you don't mind me asking, why did Felix suddenly decide to get out of the game? What was the reason? Mrs. Lee gave me a very odd look. She said hesitantly, ma'am, wasn't it because you said it would hurt your son's future? Mrs. Lee had always been a peacemaker. She quickly made a pot of soup and insisted I deliver it to Felix at his office. Ma'am, if you ask me, you're the one in the wrong this time. Just be the first to apologize. The way she said it made me sound like I was some kind of queen. Even though I still hadn't pieced together the last 7 years, it was clear Felix was still angry. I really didn't want to go back to coddling him like a child to stop him from crying. When I got to the company, I was immediately recognized and respectfully shown to the elevator. Seeing my colleagues, who just the day before were gossiping and teasing me, now treating me with such reverence felt a little strange. Guess I'm still getting used to my new perch at the top. When I reached the 18th floor, I heard people whispering. Holy crap, Ava's here. It's been years, right? This is the first time she's ever brought lunch to Mr. Wilton. Oh no, Mr. Wilton is definitely going to wear sunglasses to the afternoon meeting again. Why? Duh. His wife brought him lunch for the first time. He's going to be crying tears of joy. I felt my mouth twitch. So everyone knew Felix was a crybaby? I was so busy imagining the ridiculous sight of Felix wearing sunglasses in a meeting that I forgot to knock. I pushed the door open, and the scene inside made me freeze on the spot. In the office, a woman's shirt was half open, her chest vaguely visible as she leaned towards Felix, who was sitting in his chair. With the light behind him, I couldn't see his expression. Almost instantly, I slammed the door shut, clutching my chest and gasping for air. Oh, crap. I'm in deep trouble now. I just walked in on Felix with his mistress. Although Mrs. Lee never mentioned Felix having any flings on the side, I figured successful men usually have a few confidants to help them unwind. Felix was probably no exception. Besides, when I first started, I'd heard rumors he'd been with a few women. But then I remembered, my current identity is Felix's wife. Walking in on your own husband getting it on with the other woman, it just got even more awkward. I was about to turn and leave when the door was yanked open from the inside. Felix grabbed my arm, his voice urgent. Ava, it's not what you think. I glanced over and saw the woman being dragged out by security. Felix pulled me into the office. He gripped my shoulders tightly, his fingers trembling slightly. It's really not what you think. She came in to report on her work and just started taking her clothes off. I barely even saw anything. If you're angry, you can hit me. As many times as you want. The right cheek, you said my right cheek looks better. As he spoke, Felix took my right hand and started to move it towards his own face. Hearing this normally calm and composed man frantically explaining himself, I was a little taken aback by the contrast. For God's sake. What did I do to him over these past 7 years? How did I turn him into this? I quickly pulled my hand back, but my nail inevitably scratched his chin, leaving a faint mark. Felix ignored the small scratch, looking at me, confused. As if he couldn't understand why I didn't seem angry at all. I wasn't really angry. For one, what Felix said seemed believable. And for another, my brain and memories are still stuck 7 years in the past. There was still a part of me that was a little scared of him. I believe you. After thinking it over, I settled on that slightly cheesy line. But Felix clearly wasn't buying it. He froze, then his eyes visibly reddened. You believe me? Is that all? I looked at him, puzzled. What else? Should I have thrown a tantrum, acted all spoiled and possessive? Maybe for the me from 7 years in the future, using my looks to get my way was normal. But for the current me, it felt a little too embarrassing. I nodded and mumbled, uh-huh. Then I handed him the thermos I was holding. Mrs. Lee asked me to bring you this soup, I said with a smile. Make sure you drink it. Facing such a handsome guy, I felt a little shy and didn't dare to look up at him. My heart was pounding, nearly throwing off my breathing rhythm. After delivering the soup, I was about to leave. The next second, I was pulled into Felix's arms. His eyes were red, but the tears didn't fall. He just held me, repeating my name over and over. His voice was choked with emotion, full of a heart-wrenching plea. It was like he was begging for something, or maybe just unconsciously asking for love. Ava, Ava. His voice tickled my ear, making my whole body feel weak. Was Felix even a man in his past life? How is he so good at seducing people? Hearing faint noises from outside the door, I guessed someone was eavesdropping. My face flushed, unable to handle Felix being so clingy. After a couple of soft coughs, I pushed the man away. I should go. You can get back to work. I don't know what about that sentence set Felix off. His throat went dry, he sucked in a breath, and his face turned pale. Did I do something wrong? I let out a soft huh? And shook my head. No. Why would Felix think that? But before I could dwell on it, there was a knock on the door. Mr. Wilton, the meeting is about to start. I quickly straightened my clothes, made sure I looked presentable, and hurriedly said, I'm leaving now, you should get to work. Behind me, where I couldn't see, Felix's tears finally broke free the moment he heard those words. After leaving the office, I still felt dazed. I never imagined that 7 years later, Felix would turn into such a needy husband. To be honest, the reason I agreed to be his personal assistant in the first place was that I was attracted to him. I intentionally tried to seduce him a few times, and to my surprise, he took the bait. But life has its own plans. Who would have thought I'd wake up 7 years later? And as Felix's wife, no less. Aside from a vague sense of anxiety and worry, I was mostly thrilled that my secret crush had come true. But 7 years is a very long time. I urgently needed someone to tell me what happened in between. After some thought, I called Leo. Leo and I grew up in the same orphanage. He was like the brother I never had. I figured he must know what happened to me over the past 7 years. We agreed to meet at a coffee shop. To me, the man in front of me was the Leo from 7 years in the future. His face was more mature and steady, but he still had that same handsome, scholarly look. Amnesia? I nodded, looking guilty. But that was the only explanation I could give him. I couldn't just tell him I time traveled 7 years into the future. Leo would probably think I was insane. I just want to know what happened between me and Felix over these 7 years. Leo was skeptical but told me the truth anyway. I became Felix's personal assistant when I was 20. 3 years later, our relationship changed, and we started dating. After a year of dating, we had a huge fight and broke up. After the breakup, for some reason, Felix kept pestering me to get back together. I couldn't get rid of him. So, I had no choice but to accept his marriage proposal. As for what happened after that, I could probably guess. There was just one thing I didn't understand. Leo, why did Felix and I break up? Leo's eyes darted away, a flash of avoidance in them. He mumbled, because of me. I gave Leo a confused look and said, huh? Because of him? I kept pressing, but Leo refused to say another word. So I had to let it go. He offered to drive me home, casually asking about how Felix and I were doing. My mind was elsewhere, so my answers were vague. Just before I got out of the car, Leo suddenly asked, "So, are you planning to divorce Felix?" Divorce? Definitely not. Even though I suddenly found myself 7 years in the future, I've always really liked Felix. Besides, the me from these past 7 years has trained Felix to be this way. Who wouldn't love that? Before I could answer, a series of piercing honks came from outside. I looked over and saw Felix in his low-key luxury car, his face expressionless as he laid on the horn. Back at home, Felix was unusually silent. The house was quiet. Mrs. Lee had disappeared at some point. The silence was suffocatingly awkward. I scratched my head, trying to make small talk. "Did you eat?" Felix turned to look at me, his face a little pale. "Mrs. Lee said you have amnesia." I thought that was the real reason you're so indifferent to me. But Ava, you spent the whole afternoon with Leo. You didn't even answer my calls. You don't have amnesia. You just regret marrying me, don't you? I quickly pulled out my phone. Only then did I see that Felix had called me over 20 times. No wonder he got off work so early today. The sky outside was gradually darkening as a light rain began to fall. Felix stared at me, unblinking, his voice low and tired. "Ava, you still want a divorce, don't you?" "A divorce? What divorce?" I opened my mouth to try and explain. "No, boss." Hearing that title, Felix squeezed his eyes shut. Damn this mouth of mine. It's such a habit, I haven't switched over yet. I awkwardly forced out, "Honey, let me explain." Felix's eyes snapped open, his expression even more wounded. He looked at me in disbelief. "You're calling me honey for Leo? This is the first time you've ever called me that on your own. Are you that desperate to protect him?" I really want to find my future self and ask, what on earth did you do to Felix? This was seriously the first time I'd called him honey in our entire marriage. It's over. There's no explaining this now. No, Felix, I'm not trying to protect Leo. Besides, Leo is basically family to me. Why the hell would I need to protect him from my husband? Felix seemed to almost laugh at my clumsy defense. He slowly walked towards me, looking down at my face, the corners of his eyes starting to turn red. "You're not. If I hadn't forcibly dragged you back 3 years ago, you probably would have run off with him to God knows where." "Who? Run off with who?" "Leo." "Oh, for the love of God. Why do I have to clean up the messes my future self made?" No wonder Leo was so evasive at the coffee shop when he said it was because of him. So Felix thought I was having an affair with him. Seeing Felix's eyes, red and brimming with tears that refused to fall, made my heart ache. I took a deep breath and decided to tell him the truth. "Felix, I don't actually have amnesia. I just woke up and was inexplicably transported from 7 years ago to now." I couldn't quite find the right words, and I had no idea if he understood me. After I finished, a single tear finally rolled down Felix's cheek. Then another, and another, like a string of pearls that wouldn't stop. His expression was fragile as he gave a self-deprecating laugh, his voice thick with emotion. "Ava, do you take me for a fool? To come up with such a ridiculous excuse." Felix paused, his voice calm. "If you had just come up with a slightly more believable reason, would have forced myself to believe it." I wanted to cry but had no tears. "It's absurd, I know. But it's actually the truth." Felix sniffled, wiping away his tears. His voice was hoarse and weak. Ava, should I take this to mean that you don't want to acknowledge the 7 years we've known each other? I was too shocked to speak. What kind of logic was that? How did he even get there? Felix is so insecure. I took a step forward, wanting to hug the shattered man in front of me. But Felix just gave a faint, broken smile and took half a step back, avoiding my embrace. Enough, Ava. This is what I deserve. I was about to speak, but Felix cut me off. He turned away, not letting me see his vulnerability. He laughed bitterly, shaking his head as if mocking himself. It's been 7 years. Even if you were a block of ice, should have warmed you up by now. If you've made up your mind in 3 days, I'll agree to let you go. And I'll agree to a divorce. After saying that, as if terrified to hear my answer, Felix stumbled out of the house like he was fleeing. I didn't get a single word in. Seeing him bolt, I quickly called out to him. That was a mistake. As soon as he heard my voice, Felix ran even faster. And just like that, I watched him run away. Seriously. Felix is not an ox. Why is he so stubborn and impossible to rein in? Not long after Felix left, Mrs. Lee rushed back. Ma'am, Mr. Wilton asked me to come back and cook for you. I saw her as my savior and quickly grabbed her hand. Mrs. Lee, I know you're in a hurry, but please, just wait a second. I tearfully begged Mrs. Lee to tell me everything that had happened over the years, down to the last detail. Leo was clearly holding back. There had to be things I didn't know. And I was certain those things were the key events that led Felix and me to this point. Mrs. Lee was startled by my state but didn't dare ask questions and quickly recounted the past 7 years. It turns out, after 3 years as his personal assistant, I came to believe Felix just saw me as a plaything. So I took the initiative and told him I wanted to end our clandestine relationship. Felix refused and instead forced me to be his girlfriend. Our relationship was going well until Leo found out about us. Desperate for a commendation, he wanted me to help him steal information about Felix's underground dealings. When I refused, Leo went to Felix himself. I don't know what he said to him, but Felix broke one of his fingers and somehow forced him to resign from the SWAT team. I didn't understand the full situation and, in a panic, got into a huge fight with Felix. Felix thought I didn't love him at all and was only with him for Leo and the classified information. I said some harsh things, broke up with him, and went to the hospital to take care of Leo. Leo wanted to go back with me to the small city where our orphanage was. Coincidentally, I found out I was pregnant and planned to go to the city to relax and figure things out. But Felix and his men intercepted me at the airport and dragged me straight to the courthouse to get married. Felix always believed I never loved him and only stayed with him because of the child. And I believed Felix had no respect or understanding for me, and was only nice to me for the baby's sake. After hearing it all, I forgot to even cry. It was so dramatic. Forced proximity, the secretary trope, marriage before love. The plot was overly complicated. More thrilling than a romance novel. And most importantly, the main character was me. Seeing that I had calmed down, Mrs. Lee said sorrowfully, Ma'am, after you gave birth, you were always so depressed. Mr. Wilton tried so many ways to cheer you up, but nothing worked. You couldn't be away from the child for even a minute. I scratched my head, a slow realization dawning on me. That's right, I haven't even seen my child yet. Mrs. Lee went to cook. As I slowly sorted through my thoughts, I realized that the me from 7 years ago and Felix were a classic case of a couple who just didn't talk. Maybe we were both just too afraid of losing each other. That's why even the slightest disturbance was unbearable. It wasn't that Felix didn't love me. He loved me to the bone. And from Mrs. Lee's description, Felix didn't treat me like a trophy wife at all. I stroked my chin, thought for a moment, and asked Mrs. Lee, maybe I should go apologize. The cleaver came down hard on the cutting board with a loud thud. It made me jump. What's that saying? A woman in love can't even hold a knife steady. I gave a weak smile and said, Mrs. Lee, what's wrong? When Mrs. Lee turned to look at me, I saw her eyes were red. I was shocked. Is this teary-eyed thing contagious? Then I heard Mrs. Lee choke out, "Ma'am, you're finally willing to be the first to apologize. If you had done this sooner, Mr. Wilton would have given his life for you." I felt my mouth twitch but didn't dare say anything. Great, now we've added the "I'd die for you" trope to the mix. But I couldn't get in touch with Felix. I suspected he was avoiding me. So I decided to put it on hold and just corner him at the office tomorrow. I refused to believe he'd abandon his company. Just as I finished dinner, the doorbell rang. Was it Felix? Overjoyed, I ran to the door, ready to welcome him with all the enthusiasm I could muster. But when I looked down, I saw a tiny little boy. Well, it was definitely Felix. Just a miniature version. I stared in shock at this little kid who was practically a carbon copy of Felix. This is my and Felix's child? Mommy. Mrs. Lee heard the noise and came out, surprised. Noah, who brought you back? Noah pointed to the empty space behind him. His little face looked confused as he said in a soft, sweet voice, "Where's my dad? He was just here." Now I understood. On the surface, Felix was giving me 3 days to cool off and think. But in reality, he secretly sent our son over, all to soften me up. Unbelievable. He won't answer my calls, but he'll send our son. He clearly doesn't want a divorce. I let out a cold laugh and suddenly changed my mind. I was planning to go talk things over with him tomorrow. But since Felix loves playing the disappearing act so much, I'm not in a hurry anymore. He wants to cool off? Fine, let's both cool off. I spent 3 days at home with Noah. The little guy was chatty and incredibly good at being cute. I finally understood why Mrs. Lee said I couldn't be away from him for a second. Damn it. How could something so sweet and soft exist in this world? Not only did he perfectly inherit the best features from me and Felix, but most importantly, he didn't inherit Felix's tendency to cry at the drop of a hat. Thank goodness for that. Mom, did you kick Dad out to the office again? Noah asked, looking up at me as we lay sunbathing together. My face flushed as I silently latched onto the key word, again. Did I used to kick Felix out to the office often? Noah continued, Mom, how many days do you think it'll take for Dad to apologize to you this time? Are you going to make him kneel again? I was stunned. How does even my own son know about this so clearly? I quickly said, No, Mommy won't make Daddy kneel anymore. Noah shook his head, nuzzling me with his. But why not, Mommy? Daddy actually likes kneeling. He says it's a sign that you love him. Ava. Look what you've done to Felix. I silently cursed myself a few times. I calculated the time. It had been 3 days. It was time to go find Felix at the office. To be honest, after 3 days without seeing that handsome face, I was starting to miss him. As I got up to leave, Noah tagged along behind me, reminding me, Mommy, remember to speak gently. Daddy's already out of eye drops. Did I used to yell at Felix a lot? My world is collapsing. How could I be so awful? But I patiently told Noah, Mommy knows. When I got to the office, the receptionist greeted me like a savior. Ma'am, you're finally here. You have no idea what these past 3 days have been like for us. The receptionist, on the verge of tears, sent me up in the elevator. Just before the doors closed, she added a tactful plea, Please, make sure you clear up the misunderstanding. I looked helpless. I've lost count of how many people have told me that. It must be because we used to fight at the office a lot. When I got to his floor, everyone held their breath when they saw me, daring only to whisper amongst themselves. She's here, she's here. The savior has finally arrived. Don't speak too soon. What if she's just here to add fuel to the fire? Look at how angry she seems. Someone get the boss's sunglasses ready. Don't say that. I was hoping she came to make up. In your dreams. When have you ever seen her back down? Her neck is made of steel. I heard every word they said, a vein throbbing in my temple. Never see me back down, huh? Today, I'm going to blow your minds. As I reached the door, I heard two voices from inside. Quinn. What kind of garbage advice did you give me? It's been 3 days, and my wife still hasn't come looking for me. Some strategic retreat. If my wife runs off, I'm shipping you to Africa. I was counting on my son to put in a good word for me, but he's too busy getting all lovey-dovey with my wife to even remember I exist. What did I do to deserve this? Felix's voice went from loud to soft, gradually taking on a tearful tone. I didn't even have to guess. If I pushed the door open now, I'd see him with red, tear-filled eyes. I thought about it and decided not to knock, to give him a moment to pull himself together. Quinn quickly said, "Come on, boss, not again. You're crying again." I heard something crash to the floor as Felix yelled, "I'm not crying." I couldn't help but smile. Then I heard Quinn again, "Boss, don't panic. Maybe she just needs some time to cool down. Besides, the strategic retreat might be slow, but it's effective. You gotta trust me." I had to admit, he had a point. The tactic did work, it's just that Felix didn't have the patience for it. Felix's voice was hoarse. Cool down? She hasn't spoken to me in 3 days. If she cools down any more, I'm afraid she'll go straight to the courthouse and sign the divorce papers. I listened silently, a smile playing on my lips the whole time. Then I heard rushed footsteps and Felix's voice from inside. I don't care anymore. Even if she beats me to death, I'm going back to apologize. Keyboards, durian shells, acupressure mats, I don't care, I'll kneel on them all. The door was suddenly flung open, and I didn't have time to wipe the smile off my face. The result was me, grinning like an idiot, staring at Felix, who was wearing sunglasses. But Felix still tried to act tough. What are you doing here? I turned to leave. Felix dropped the act and quickly pulled me into the office. Don't go. Once inside the office, I saw Quinn. Quinn had been Felix's second in command, basically his right-hand man. But he didn't look as impressive now as he did back then. I smiled at him and said diplomatically, "Your outfit is very simple." Quinn scratched his head and said honestly, "That's what you get for being a public school teacher." Oh, so he had become a glorious educator. I nodded and said politely, "Thank you for your hard work, Mr. Quinn." Quinn waved his hand and said as he walked to the door, "Nah, not hard work. Just a hard life." After the outsider left, I slowly turned to Felix. "I have something to tell you." Felix's face changed, his lips trembling slightly. He was silent for a moment, fighting back tears. "What is it?" Seeing him like this, I knew he thought I was going to talk about divorce. I let out a heavy sigh, a sour feeling in my heart. "Felix, I'm sorry. For the me from 7 years in the future, and for the me right now. No matter which version of me it was, Felix's love for me never changed. It was practically in his bones. I thought I was so clever, but I was just taking advantage of his love for me." Felix's eyes suddenly welled up. He took off his sunglasses, revealing that beautiful, pitiful look again. I silently agreed with what I used to say, he really was a pretty boy when he cried. "Do you think apologizing will make me agree to a divorce?" I immediately shot back, "Who said I want a divorce?" Then, I put my words into action, plopping myself down on his lap and wrapping my arms around his neck. I could never leave my pretty boy. The next second, Felix's eyes were red, his face was red, and the blush spread all the way to the tips of his ears. He looked like he couldn't believe what he was hearing, asking cautiously, "What do you mean?" I couldn't resist teasing him. "Honey, even if I got hit by a car, I'd crawl my way back home to you." Felix's expression changed instantly. "Don't say things like that," he said fiercely. His little expressions made my heart melt. But it was followed by a wave of intense heartache and sorrow. Felix put himself in such a low position. My every word and action was like a violent storm in his world. I cupped his handsome face in my hands, looked into his reddened eyes, and gently kissed him. I said softly, "Felix, I love you. I've always loved you. I've never liked anyone else but you. So please, let go of all your worries and just accept my love. You are the only choice for me, and you always will be." As expected, Felix started crying again. But he tried to hold it in, the tears trembling on his lashes, making him look exceptionally endearing. Is there anything more satisfying than seeing a powerful man begging for affection? Are you telling the truth? I nodded, affirming it once more. It's true. Even if I've lost so many memories, my heart still beats faster the first time I see you. Words can lie, but the body can't. No matter how many years passed, no matter how hazy my memories became, as long as I saw him, my heart would still beat for him. Felix held me very tightly. It was a little hard to breathe, but I didn't push him away. He desperately needed an unwavering choice. I love him, so I was willing to give him that. Even if you're lying to me, I'll accept it. But if you ever dare mention divorce again, I'll die right in front of you. I just hummed in agreement. Felix continued his threat. And, I'll hate you for the rest of my life. I thought for a moment. What's the difference between hating me for a lifetime and thinking about me for a lifetime? But I didn't say it out loud. I was afraid Felix would shatter into a million pieces again. After a while of kissing, Felix finally calmed down. I asked the question I wanted to ask the most. "Felix, you liked me from the very beginning, didn't you? Otherwise, with my resume, how could I have become his personal assistant right off the bat?" If Felix's scheming wasn't involved, I wouldn't believe it. Now that he was in a good mood, Felix generously admitted it. I wasn't too surprised. I muttered casually, and here I thought our love was fate. Felix pinched my cheek, not hard, but it tickled. He said fiercely, "Bullshit. It was me, scheming and plotting and fighting tooth and nail to make it happen." I looked at him, a little surprised. But thinking about it, other than Felix's refusal to let go, I couldn't think of any other reason. "Felix, you always thought it was your dirty tricks and our child that kept me here. But the truth is, I stayed willingly. A woman will only have a child for the man she loves. He's our shared treasure." I regretted it as soon as I said it. For God's sake. Why is he crying again? When will Felix ever get over this crybaby habit? Oh well. He's my man, I'll have to spoil him. Felix's tears were like the softest part of his heart. Every time they fell, they spoke of his love and insecurity for me. And I finally understood. Love isn't a game, it's not about who backs down first loses. Love is about mutual tolerance and understanding. It's being willing to let go of your pride for the other person, and willing to hold each other tight through the storm.